Welcome to the Wirex Podcast. I'm your host, Lianna Adams. Today, we're exploring Aid 3.0, how blockchain is transforming humanitarian relief. Our guest, Jessi Wolz, Head of Programs at Coala Pay, shares how blockchain brings transparency, speed, and trust to crisis response, and why it could redefine how global aid is delivered. Let's get into it. Welcome, Jessi.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's start off with your professional background and how you got into all of this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I've been working in the foreign aid sector for over 15 years, and that work has taken me to parts of Latin America, the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa, where I'm based now. I live in Kenya. And that the content of my work has really varied, ranging from overseeing security sector reform programs in South Sudan shortly after that country's independence to monitoring the 2014 runoff election in Afghanistan. It's been an incredibly rewarding career, very meaningful. And now to be working with Coala Pay, which is a company that's trying to solve some of the recurrent problems with how aid funding arrives at its final destination, really feels like a crowning achievement in my career. I joined Coala Pay in 2023, so in its early days, and I knew Malen, the founder of Coala Pay, from South Sudan, actually. We overlapped there for a brief time before the 2013 war kicked off. And in fact, I borrowed a green dress from her for the U.S. Embassy Marine Ball. But when I joined Coala Pay in 2023, I had no experience with blockchain or digital currency. Truly zero. So I was the perfect test case for what Coala Pay is trying to do with blockchain in the foreign aid sector. Like most of my team members, I think we're about 11 now in total with a blockchain development team on the side. We're all former humanitarians and development professionals, and we've been in the sector for a long time and ready to try new approaches, but we're still very rooted in humanitarian aid principles. So we're kind of humanitarians at heart, but using this new technology to make the improvements we would have liked to have seen over the last decade plus.
Yeah, that's amazing. And this subject is really close to my heart. What does Aid 3.0 mean to you, and how does it differ from traditional humanitarian relief models?
To me, Aid 3.0 means getting more funding to local responders and proximate organizations. My belief, and a lot of my team agree, that proximate organizations or local responders are better placed to respond to the challenges and crises in their communities. For example, in Sudan, you may know that there's a lot of community organizations called emergency response rooms that are providing food aid directly to the communities. And they have long been the only organizations or response committees able to actually serve the communities in which they live because of the difficulty of foreigners getting into the country. And that takes place across different crises, right? This is a repetitive cycle. And so I think Aid 3.0 is getting more funding to those types of actors. And at present, with Aid 2.0, it's difficult to get a precise figure at a global level, but we know that in 2024, around only 12% of USAID funding reached truly local organizations. And that is in juxtaposition to a 2016 commitment by some of the world's major donors and humanitarian organizations to get a target of 25% of all funding delivered directly to local organizations. So, in other words, there's a lot of improvement to be made. And I think Aid 3.0, frankly, needs to get there. And I think with the current and forthcoming cuts in the global aid budget, it's going to force the industry's hand a bit to really push more funding to local organizations. Obviously, there's been a lot of effort to try to do better, but we're still pretty low at 12 to say 20%. Let's assume best case scenario. So that's important to me for Aid 3.0. I think also Aid 3.0, especially amid the drastic cuts again in the budget we're witnessing, really asks us to reduce administrative processes and costs associated with moving funding to the local level. At Coala Pay, the point that we're making with our solution is that we can reduce administrative processes and costs without reducing transparency or accountability, thanks to frontier technology like blockchain. So in Aid 2.0, there's a number of intermediary actors in that aid funding flow that serve to administer and manage aid programming. Those can be consulting firms, large international non-governmental organizations, or INGOs as they're called. And these organizations exist because the funding from governments like the US or EU have such stringent and excessive financial and or reporting requirements that small grassroots organizations would not be able to manage. So they do serve a purpose, and they are, part of the system. The challenge is, in order for these intermediate organizations to do their work, they have to have on staff, 20 plus accountants or auditors or compliance team members. And that takes money, right? So there's, in that aid funding flow, a 20 to 30% cut of the funding along the way to that local level that these intermediate organizations need to keep out in order to manage and administer this large amount of funding. So I think, this is some of the bloat that we hear about and talk about in the foreign aid sector. It's not waste or fraud. In fact, it's people, that are hired to make sure that there isn't waste or fraud. But there's got to be a better way. And we're really working on that change at Coala Pay. And we're finding that our clients, who are some of these intermediate organizations, like these large INGOs, they're really hungry for that change. They're ready to embrace new technology to eliminate the administrative burdens. They're also fed up of week-long delays to get funding into a crisis context. I've never met a humanitarian aid worker or professional who really was happy with the current way of doing things, but we're all working in a system that is largely donor-driven, that inhibits rapid and efficient responses to challenges in the countries that we work in. So, yeah, I want to see Aid 3.0 get more funding to the local level and do it at a lower cost and with less bloat.
Yeah, you and I the same. When did blockchain first enter the conversation around humanitarian aid, do you think? And what catalyzed that shift?
I think that shift is being catalyzed right now, but the aid sector has been flirting with the use of blockchain since 2017 or 2018. These were small-scale pilots inside large organizations like the World Food Program and different United Nations agencies. And unfortunately, they didn't have the ability to scale. It is more of a piecemeal approach that couldn't catch momentum. And I think part of the reason why is because of the cost of building something on blockchain was higher back then, but also because of the cost recovery funding model of the aid sector, scaling is very difficult versus, say, the approach that Coala Pay has taken, which is to be venture-backed. It allows us to take some more risks and take a little more time with innovation. But also problematic for scaling those early blockchain solutions was that the aid sector funding model does not incentivize sharing across the sector very well, even if the solution is really great and it's going to serve ultimately the beneficiaries or the clients at the end. Everyone is in steep competition for very little funding. And so they're incentivized to keep a good solution within their own organization at the detriment of the entire sector or the people we're trying to serve. They have to do that in order to stay alive. So when we set up Coala Pay, we knew that we needed to create a solution that could be independent. In other words, not established within an existing nonprofit or NGO. And we knew that we couldn't use the traditional nonprofit funding model because it is cost recovery. So by choosing to be venture-backed and organization agnostic, we're truly able to take blockchain technology to any actor in the foreign aid system and say, hey, we've seen this work with your peer organization. Here's what they did. why don't you let us see if it could work for you? And hopefully, over time, the entire sector benefits from blockchain technology, and we can really scale it and really catalyze a shift within the foreign aid sector.
Yeah, I'd really love to see that day, because I think, traditional systems have failed so many times, right? When it comes to humanitarian aid. And yeah, I mean, could you walk us through a real life example of blockchain being used in a crisis situation?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll use an example from a pilot that we led with Norwegian Refugee Council, or NRC, last year in Sudan. So for this pilot, NRC and five Sudanese organizations had opened digital wallets, and they're going to use those digital wallets to send and receive grants of 25,000 USDT to implement humanitarian aid activities across the country. Just in case listeners don't know, USDT is a stablecoin. It's one of the common stablecoins that we use at Coala Pay. Also, we use USDC. But in this case, they were using USDT. So shortly after the partner organizations received the grant in USDT from NRC, one of them had to flee their location. And then by that, I mean leave the office, all of the records, not to mention staff homes, behind very quickly due to the war arriving in their location. And we had been corresponding with the organization's leaders pretty regularly, and we had noticed they had gone offline, which is not uncommon in the work that we do. And we hadn't heard from them for over a week. And so shortly after a week or two, I can't remember the exact amount of time, the executive director of the organization got in touch once she had arrived to a secure location to let us know what had happened, that she and her team had to flee. And she said with, a relief that the digital wallet and this, in this case, the organization's grant from NRC was secure. She had remembered to grab the secret recovery phrase as staff evacuated the office. So despite having to all of a sudden drop everything and flee on, a moment's notice, the organization's funding from NRC was safe and had moved with them, which allowed them, once they arrived to their new location, to serve the community of displaced persons where they were now located. So imagine if instead of having that funding securely in a digital wallet, and even more importantly in a US digital dollar, essentially, that money or that funding from NRC was stored at the local bank branch in Sudanese pounds in a context where the interbank transfer system was dysfunctional. They would have had a very different outcome and been unable to immediately adapt and use that funding for the crisis in the new location.
Yeah, that's amazing. In 2021, I had actually used blockchain to help the people in Afghanistan because at that time, the Taliban had shut the banks. And so, for countless of families, it's not just an inconvenience, it's life-threatening, right? And yeah, I was really amazed by how through blockchain technology we could really help the people on the ground. And I'm sure like you'll have more stories for us. What are the key benefits blockchain offers for aid delivery? Is it transparency, traceability, speed, and how do they play out on the ground?
I think the speed, low cost, and ease with which blockchain moves assets across borders is essential for aid delivery. The traditional financial infrastructure was not built for international aid. We work across borders. We move money into places that already have very limited financial infrastructure. So blockchain's decentralized nature really offers transformative potential for this sector. It's faster, it's cheaper, and in some places, like in the scenario I just explained, more reliable than the traditional banking system. So for example, let's assume for aid delivery, we're sending some amount of US dollars from the US to a context like Sudan. And that transfer incurs fees of 5 to 10%, which ultimately that percentage is being taken out of the funds that will reach communities in crisis. Take that to a scale of hundreds of millions of dollars annually across the sector, right? Because that's just for one transaction to move money for one grant or one foreign aid program into a context like Sudan. So you're looking at losses of a lot across the entire sector annually. But then in fragile contexts like Sudan, these costs escalate further due to very limited banking infrastructure and risk premiums. And that would be the case in other crisis contexts like Afghanistan, right, or Myanmar. Then you tack on to that the security risks and additional costs for getting this funding to the last mile. And you're looking at premiums as high as 20 to 30% in some of the extreme operating environments. And then in terms of delays in these extreme operating environments, if the banking system can actually reach that last mile, it's going to take weeks, sometimes months. And that doesn't serve a crisis context well. So at Coala Pay, we are using also smart contracts to automate payment flows based on aid programming logic, which is, again, unique to blockchain technology that offers this smart contract technology. So we are essentially using smart contracts to be a virtual project or a grant agreement. We're using them to program payment logic through triggers like milestone verifications or real world events, such as a weather disaster. So, for example, in Somalia, we have programmed smart contracts with an Oracle technology to pull regional weather data related to local drought and flooding conditions. And we feed that data to the smart contract to trigger automated payments to local organizations once a threshold is reached. So, for example, what that means, this means that as soon as a flooding or a drought event occurs in a region within Somalia, again, based on a complex data model, the local organization would immediately receive the USDT or USDC in their digital wallet once that threshold is hit, say, 10 inches of rainfall in an hour or whatever it is. That payment gets triggered from the smart contract. It's in their digital wallet. They then work with an off-ramp service provider to convert that funding into either bank accounts or the mobile money accounts of end recipients for immediate use. In the future, we would love to start to use smart contracts and Oracle technology for migration and conflict data, ultimately reducing the amount of time between a crisis event and funding reaching the ground. So for us, that smart contract has some of the key benefits to the foreign aid sector.
And also secure, right? They have their money safe, and as you clearly explained earlier on about the money, right? Like if the person didn't have a digital wallet, the money would have been lost, really. So how does blockchain improve trust between donors, NGOs, and recipients?
I think blockchain's immutability and traceability are key for building trust between donors and NGOs or end recipients. The fact that the funding flows can be traced from origin to recipients on a public ledger makes blockchain very compelling for the foreign aid sector versus, say, the current model of a donor, whether that's an institution or an individual, sends the funding to the bank account of an NGO, let's say, and maybe that NGO is US-based. So the donor is US-based, they send it to, a US-based NGO. And from there, that funding makes its way through the banking system of the various actors involved in that aid funding flow chain, all of which is indirect and opaque versus, again, kind of that blockchain method, which is direct from wallet to the end recipient wallet, right? And that direct, transfer and the traceability is what we're really trying to promote for the aid sector. It will take some time because the aid system is what it is. But again, people are interested. People are hungry. And in terms of how blockchain builds trust between the donor and recipient, I'd say the speed and the reliability of blockchain transactions really builds trust on the recipient side. So when a donor is trying to get funding to a partner organization in, say, remote Malawi or a crisis context, and it keeps getting delayed or blocked or even sometimes returned by the banking system, trust between donor and recipient inevitably gets broken down. Recipients can't rely on the system, and they can't rely on the donor that's using the system to get the life-saving aid. But even more, with digital wallets and the ability to hold the value of funding in a digital dollar or euro, recipients, again, whether those are individual or organizations, they gain a lot of control over their funds. So, like you just mentioned, they can trust that even if they need to leave the country on short notice, or if they are currently excluded from the traditional financial system because they don't have the right ID or they lost their ID for understandable reasons, with blockchain technology, now they can receive their funding securely, control that funding even more from things like long delays because it's instant. The transfers are instant. They're not, beholden to geographic limitations. And they also get to hold that funding in the digital dollar or euro. So if they're in a context with high volatility of the local currency, they're no longer as impacted by that. They can choose to convert their digital dollar or euro into the local currency at a rate that is usually market-based. And even more, they can do that conversion when it's more favorable for them. So I think it builds the trust on the recipient side that donors are willing to engage in this because it gives end recipients more control and more management and ensures that they're financially included.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for the donors as well, to see that it's going to the people on the ground, the people who really need it is, definitely helps build trust, right? And, in practice, how are blockchain-based systems deployed in environments with, let's say, limited internet or tech infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we get this question a lot, and we face this question a lot because of the places that we're working in. And kind of high level answer is just with a lot of caution and an eye for do no harm. So before we as Coala Pay deploy our solution in any country or any region for that matter, we always conduct a feasibility assessment. And in that feasibility assessment, we're looking at things like what is the internet connectivity across the country and in certain regions? What is the smartphone penetration in a given area? Because, to engage in blockchain technology, you need a smartphone. We're also looking at what is the digital literacy of the end recipients. So are they organizations? Are they individuals? And are they going to be able to use blockchain technology? So we always do an assessment of those areas, plus some others, before we go into a certain location. And if we feel like bringing people into this technology would either put them at any risk or would be too difficult and might mean that they would, not be able to access their funds at any point, even if we're giving lots of hands-on support, or if frankly there's just no internet at all, we don't engage because we have to have that do no harm principle front of mind as a humanitarian serving organization. In terms of internet connectivity, I'd say limited internet is workable. We work with partner organizations in countries and locations where they are in and out of service, so it's intermittent at best. They might have to rely on satellite internet like Starlink, and that is all workable. It just means that we need to, be prepared for some delays. It means we need to time transactions that take place. We also ensure that recipients, where possible, that there are redundancies on their team. So, for example, if ultimately the funding is going to a local organization or, an informal group like a women's group, or like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, the emergency rooms in Sudan, we either ask that those groups use a multi-signatory wallet so that multiple people can control that wallet, or even if they're using, say, a self-custodial, individual wallet, that at least two people in that group or on that team have access to the wallet. And that at any time, one of those people is likely to have access to internet. So we try to create redundancies within a limited internet connectivity situation that allows for that funding to still flow with confidence. It's really the no internet that is the challenge. Thankfully, that's not the reality in most places that we work. It is sometimes. It's still, a challenge we need to work with, and we're working on a solution, but we're not there yet. It's just the reality of, blockchain needs connectivity. So we do what we can, but it does present challenges.
Yeah, I can imagine. And are there any examples where blockchain has failed or has caused more problems than it solved?
I don't think so. We haven't had this situation yet where it has failed. That's inherent to running a pilot. And that's why, we always say with new clients, well, we do the feasibility assessment so we can kind of predict any failures. But also we always say, we are going to learn together, right? This is a pilot. It could fail in some ways. But what I have seen more of is where we confront situations where blockchain can't solve the problem that a donor or an INGO or a partner organization is looking to solve. So back to that last question around blockchain can't solve problems in locations that are totally cut off from the internet. Like I said, we don't have a solution for that yet. We're exploring one, but we are probably going to continue to confront that as a kind of a challenge that we just can't solve. But another challenge that we confront that blockchain can't completely solve is liquidity. So we work in a lot of liquidity challenged contexts like Sudan, Syria, others. And a lot of INGOs or donors or foundations will come to us and say or ask, can blockchain get more cash on the ground? And the answer is not yet and not fully. And what I mean by that is until we can create an entirely closed loop system wherein no one needs to off-ramp that digital currency into cash at all, we can't solve the cash problem. I mean, there is a future, and we're working on it, that in these contexts, like in Sudan and Syria, that let's say an individual receives 100 USDT or USDC in their digital wallet, and then they could go to the local market and pay for rice or whatever it is, grains in digital currency, and that vendor accepts USDT or USDC. They also have a digital wallet. That's what I mean by a closed loop system. That is the ideal, and in some parts of the world, that's really possible, right? But again, in the countries where we're working, we're not there yet. We're piloting to kind of build that infrastructure, but ultimately that would be, a solution to the liquidity challenges in these places where we just don't even need to get to cash. That's the dream. And that also makes it more traceable, right? So it's a dream for multiple reasons. But what blockchain can do, and this is again something we're exploring in the pilots we're running, is because we can program smart contracts in such a way that settlement of payments can be instant or near, real time. We're trying to open up and tap into new pools of liquidity in these kind of liquidity constrained locations. And by what I mean by that is, let's say you have large businesses in these locations, like petroleum companies or large supermarkets that do have liquidity, but they are not willing to work with the foreign aid sector at the moment because the foreign aid sector is slow. So, in order to offer up their liquidity pools to the foreign aid sector, who needs that liquidity to, say, get cash to households, they understand that by doing so, they would need to upfront a lot of cash, and then it could take them, 3 to 6 months to ever be reimbursed for that cash. And, that's not a very good incentive to opening up large pools of liquidity. Whereas if we can use blockchain technology to shorten that time, then we're hopeful that we can get some of these larger liquidity pools in these businesses to start to work with the foreign aid sector by saying, listen, through a smart contract, we can get you near real-time reconciliation for this cash that you have. So that's how we're working to solve some of these challenges that, the foreign aid sector has, the blockchain can't fully solve just yet, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get there. And I remember when we were helping the people in Afghanistan, we had to also send in small tranches, right? Pay not to alert the Taliban, that big sums of money is coming into Afghanistan, and also, as you say, liquidity. So yeah, really looking forward to the day where this problem is solved. But it's it takes a village, right? It takes all of us to kind of work together to make that happen. What's the biggest misconception about blockchain and humanitarian work that you'd like to clear up?
I think for the Web3 side, and by that I mean Web3 companies and individuals who are becoming donors, are interested in donating, or getting involved in humanitarian work. One of the questions we continually confront is, why don't we just send cash directly to someone on the ground? That kind of direct cash model. And that should be, or those, a lot of times the Web3 world thinks that that is what humanitarian aid is, or that's all that it should be. And one of the misconceptions that they have is around that is all that communities might need, or that if you just get cash into hands of folks, then that solves an issue. And we at Coala Pay always, say, like, there's a lot more to uplifting communities and families. And take the example of keeping health clinic open in rural Afghanistan or wherever it is. That clinic needs to have medicine on hand. They need to pay health workers. And, you could give a family cash in hand. But if they don't have a health clinic to go to that's reliably open, then you're not really solving all of their problems, right? We need functional and robust markets. We need thriving communities for people to take their cash and use to meet their basic needs. So we really can try to confront that misconception on the Web3 side that getting cash to individuals is going to solve the humanitarian issues. And we really promote a more holistic model. And then I think a big misconception on the international NGO side or the donor side that we regularly confront is a question we get very early on when we start to talk about Coala Pay solution or blockchain and digital currency. We get asked, okay, well, how do you deal with the volatility? And the answer from us is, well, we use stablecoins, right? But what's interesting about that question is that it reveals the common misconception that blockchain equals cryptocurrency equals Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the more speculative activities on blockchain. And we get this all the time. And, they aren't aware of the real world use cases of blockchain, or that blockchain is a tool to move and process assets and data of all kinds. They don't have any knowledge of what's possible on blockchain, like smart contracts, like Oracle technology, like automation. And that's a real disservice to blockchain, that people think blockchain and they think cryptocurrency and they think, high swings of volatility. So that's something that we're always working to clear out, or on the donor and the foreign aid side as well.
Yeah, I have to say that I do that as well. I try to clear up in terms of the misconception on blockchain, that it's not just cryptocurrency, that it can be used for good. Yeah, Jessi, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so, but I'm very happy to answer any other questions that you have or that have come up as we've spoken.
Yeah, I mean, what's the main thing that Coala Pay is working on right now?
Yeah, we've got a lot of work in Sudan, actually, and we're working on a model that gets funding to these emergency rooms, so these truly local responders. And we're also actively engaging on Syria as the context shifts there, and how to keep aid funding moving into Syria, and what is the possibility of using blockchain. Like I said, on the case of a pilot we're doing in Somalia, we're really looking at how to use smart contracts and Oracle technology to make anticipatory action possible, and close that window between a crisis event occurring and funding reaching local actors. That's really important to us. We'd love to scale that beyond weather data to migration, to conflict data as well. And we're also looking into new payment modalities. We're starting to use blockchain technology to get cash at the household level. And we've got a couple of solutions for that. One that does not require a smartphone use for the end recipient or the individual or household. And another solution that does, using an application that we have. It's an app that has a digital wallet built into it, and also allows for data collection. It's called our Billy app, short for accountability. So we're starting to pilot that in a couple of countries. And lastly, also helping international NGOs do office replenishments. So as they open up a new office in a location that's been cut off due to conflict, but is in a location that is, again, highly constrained with liquidity, how do we get that office up and running again? So working inside international NGOs to help them move money more effectively, more cost efficiently, that need is going up as aid funding budgets are cut. So we're starting to expand, we're starting to explore new things. It's exciting. It's a lot of work, but we've got a team of great problem solvers and people who, like I said earlier in this conversation, have been seeing these issues over and over and are very ready to try to find a solution.
That's amazing. And how can people support you if they'd like to be of support?
Yeah, I think from the Web3 side, from the blockchain community, getting involved as, either potential donors. There, we've got a lot of youth groups on our platform that are doing projects all over the world, in Malawi and Vanuatu, that have already opened digital wallets, that have learned how to use digital currency, and are running, very local, very small scale programs where they are. So that's a great way to engage with Coala Pay, but also technology partners like on-ramp providers. What part of our model is we help, we support our clients, whether those are donors or these intermediary organizations like international NGOs, to figure out how to use blockchain technology and digital currency for the first time. And as much as we can, we try to simplify that process, which isn't always easy in the Web3 sector, right? We're still building those tools, but we're always looking for more intuitive, more streamlined tooling for that on-ramp process, for that off-ramp process. So that's a call to different companies out there, programmers who have ideas for how to do that. And then on the kind of foreign aid side, get in touch with us. If you're, having trouble moving money to partner organizations or individuals, hello@coalapay.org. We're always available. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us. We are very interested to continue to pilot and solve problems within the foreign aid sector.
Amazing. And that's a wrap on today's episode with Jessi Wolz, a powerful look at how blockchain is changing the way we deliver and experience aid. Thanks so much, Jessi. It's really been wonderful having you here.
Thank you. Great to speak to you.
I'm Lianna Adams, and I hope this conversation sparks some new ideas about what's possible when tech meets purpose. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time on Wirex Podcast.